From coast to coast in Newfoundland and Labrador, this is Issues and Answers with Michael Connors.
Good afternoon, I'm Michael Connors. Welcome to NTV's Issues and Answers. Worries about COVID-19 have been on the rise again in Newfoundland and Labrador. This week has seen the province pull out of the Atlantic bubble, and in some cases, municipalities and parents take measures into their own hands in response to clusters in their communities. My first guest this week is Dr. Janine Hubbard, who is a clinical child psychologist. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, first of all, I mean, you're well known. You've appeared on the NTV newscast many times before and in other media, but just tell us a bit about yourself first.
My name's Dr. Janine Hubbard. I'm a registered psychologist here in the province. My area is predominantly clinical child work, but I certainly work in a number of areas, and I'm currently president of the Association of Psychology Newfoundland and Labrador.
So this week you've been speaking a lot about the COVID-19 pandemic and how it's affected people mental health-wise. What has been your overall observation of how this pandemic has affected mental health in this province?
Oh, there's no question. It has had an impact on mental health needs both here in the province and around the globe. We've seen different stages of adjustment and coping. We had sort of the very early day adjustment, and now we're reaching a very different stage in terms of coping. But we've definitely worldwide seen increases in rates of things like anxiety, depression, insomnia. It's impacting all of us in some subtle ways and in some really significant ways for some folks.
So you know, the government gives its regular briefings and they've imposed their restrictions, but we do see cases where people sometimes take matters into their own hands. So for example, this week, especially in Deer Lake, we saw parents pulling their kids out of school. What would you say to parents in a circumstance like that?
It's so tricky because everybody's circumstances are different, and there are some households who have some very vulnerable individuals in them, and this is the first time we've encountered a student with COVID in a school yet. And so we're still figuring it out. And I think the good news is, on one level, we have really demonstrated an abundance of caution. Newfoundlanders and Labradorians as a whole have been really excellent at following the public health directives and erring on the side of caution and safety. So I can absolutely appreciate for those parents for those first couple of days where they were waiting for information to be solidified that made a lot of sense. Obviously, we don't want kids being kept out of school long-term over fears. And you know, certainly in September we had a lot of families where school refusal and school anxiety resurfaced, and we had to work very hard with a lot of our families to say, no, you need to make sure your kid is going to school. We don't want the fear to be the reason that they're avoiding school. Now, I think people this week have been appropriately cautious, and we're going to move back into, hopefully a new comfort zone.
What is the importance of having kids in school? Because we lost a third of the school year last year, and you know, school's been going steadily this time, but what are the long-term consequences of kids not being in school?
Well, we know it's a really slippery slope. As soon as we start having kids have some form of school avoidance, it becomes that much more difficult to get them back in the classroom. And sometimes it's because of unidentified learning needs. Sometimes it's because of attentional issues. Sometimes it's because of social and peer pressure. But we know that routine, that structure, the academics are important, but there's also a lot more in terms of the social emotional life of students that is vital and can really only happen in a classroom setting.
Another issue you've talked a lot about through this is COVID fatigue. We've been living this for quite a number of months right now. What do you mean by COVID fatigue?
Well, what's happened, and this is a natural response that we all have, is initially we all rallied towards an emergency. It's like when you suddenly discover that there's a family member who has a major illness. Everybody rallies, they make casseroles, they do everything they can. And over time, that starts to slip away. What has happened, especially here in our province, where we haven't really had to deal with the daily issues around COVID numbers until quite recently. It's just kind of, it's a constant little nagging on your adrenal system, on your stress system, that over time starts to wear you out. It's like driving your car with your tires at 90% inflation for months and months and months, and eventually that starts to take a toll on the system. And so what we're seeing now is we're seeing a heightened anxiety, no question. We're seeing a lot of irritability. We're seeing a lot of frustration because, again, initially there was this, hey, it's going to be for a couple of months and then we're going to get back on our feet. And now, even though we're hearing good news and we're seeing some positive things coming forward, There's still what feels like a long way off, and we're heading into winter, and all of that combination has a lot of us just feeling fed up and irritated. And the other thing that comes out is there's increased fear because of the developments in the last week or so, and fear often comes out in the form of anger.
We had, global crises in the world before. This may be kind of the first one our generation has experienced on this level. But, World War II, the Great Depression. Is there any, research from those days about how to, handle something like this in the here and now today?
There's certainly a little bit there, but some of it is kind of less relevant to our current world environment. But what we do have is research that comes from things like natural disasters. So how people have coped after massive earthquakes and tsunamis and forest fires. And again, we've sort of seen that first wave of increased acute anxiety and depression and coping, and then we see the longer term effects as things continue to drag on. And we do worry about the trauma effect on a lot of people, especially anyone who had pre-existing vulnerabilities. We know that we've been talking about the second wave of COVID within the mental health community. We know that there is an enormous wave of mental health issues that are starting to come our way, that are only beginning to come to the surface, that we're going to be addressing for years to come.
I've heard on the physical side of things, backlogs with, say, physical surgery. So are you concerned about, sort of dealing with a backlog of mental health cases once this is over?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we already had a shortage of mental health services. And what happened this year is a lot of people just went into fundamental coping when the pandemic first hit. And actually, a lot of people were like, I'm okay. I'm just focusing on getting up and dressed in the morning. I'm not worrying about kind of those bigger picture things. When school resumed and life started to return to normal a little bit this fall, we saw a huge surge in referrals and concerns coming forward. But what I think we're going to be seeing, like I say, is kind of the delayed trauma effect. And we are people are waiting far longer than they should to be able to try to access services at the moment. And we're also seeing the impact on the mental health providers. Again, this has, we all learned to pivot and shift and suddenly be providing telehealth services within about a week of the start of the pandemic. And most of us aren't that tech savvy. We've discovered some advantages that have come along with it, but it has been a real growth period for everybody involved.
We're less than a month away from Christmas now, an important season for many in this province to celebrate. I guess, what are sort of your tips for coping with COVID at Christmas time?
I think this year it's checking your expectations at the door. We need to acknowledge that this year is going to be totally different and figure out how am I going to cope with that. So first of all, allow yourself to grieve. Allow yourself to mourn the fact that the things that you were really looking forward to probably aren't going to happen this year, or if they happen, they're going to look very different. We know that there are a lot of people who are not going to be able to see family and friends this year, and so trying to, like I say, acknowledge that and then figure out, okay, how am I going to make the best of the situation? What am I going to do? Christmas is so steeped in traditions and rituals and routines, and having to try to create some new ones is both challenging, but maybe an exciting opportunity to reach out and look at what are some things that I can do differently this year. Hey, I don't have to spend the month of December running around socializing and buying gifts and finding hostess gifts and baking and, trying to be like the perfect Pinterest Christmas family. Maybe we can embrace the fact that it's going to be a little bit more low-key. Go for the drives to look at the Christmas lights. Pull out those board games again. Time and time again, one of the things that I heard from kids early in the pandemic is how much they actually enjoyed the fact that they were home with their parents and having more time to spend with them and pulling out the board games. Now again, that wore on over time and everybody needed their space, but it was a bit of a re-embracing of kind of some old traditions, some slightly slower pace of life.
Well, Dr. Janine Hubbard, thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, anytime. Thanks so much.
And stay with us while we take a short break on NTV.